Good evening. So, I cannot promise you any hidden childhood babysitters in my back pocket. I can't promise you really an enjoyable time. I can promise to share with you parts of my story, hopefully in a way that's digestible, hopefully in a way that's applicable for the lives that you will all lead when you leave here. Because ultimately, tonight is not just about tonight. That is the reason why we're all gathered. Tonight is about how can we get engaged in a way that changes our communities for the better. That helps families, children, neighbors, relatives become successful despite the circumstance that has been present in their life. Ultimately what we want, what I know the coalition wants, is for people to be successful. To experience belonging, connection, support that allows them to navigate the things that life will continue to throw their way. But here's the thing about success, and I'm going to get this out of the way very early. I know I'm talking to a room of probably a predominant Badger audience. So success isn't something you understand all that much. Some of you started to clap thinking I wasn't going to take a shot. I absolutely was going to. If you can't tell by my maroon up here, go Gophers. I got some claps. I didn't think I was going to get some claps. You tried to deter me from doing this. I have to be authentic. If there's one thing that I will be on this stage in front of you, it's myself. So, I currently live in the beautiful state of Minnesota. That's where I went to college, but I went to high school in the state of Wisconsin. Western Wisconsin, yes, I was on this side, and I chose to go to the good side. That's not even a part of my stand-up. Like, you guys are already laughing, which is awesome. So I want to talk to you about this idea of success, because one of the things that I stand firmly in is that this typical, probably traditional idea of success isn't one that I identify with. We love to think about success when it comes to individuals. We love to think about the person or platform, a success story that makes us feel good about ourselves and what they've had to overcome to get there. We love to prioritize and idolize people that have overcome hard things and made it somewhere, have become someone or something. And in large part, I benefit from that idea. I'm up here in front of you today because someone at some point decided to say, Gaelin, you know what, you're a success story about what happens in the child welfare system. But that's not true. You see, I'm not standing in front of you today as someone who benefited from the child welfare system successfully supporting me. I'm here because a community successfully supported me. I'm not a believer that individuals are successful by themselves. I believe that people are only as successful as the support that they receive. I would challenge anybody in this room tonight to think about hard things that you've overcome in your own lives. And I would challenge you to think about a moment in which you didn't have somebody support you so that you could be successful, be who you are in that seat at this very moment. The thing is, we all need somebody. The unfortunate part is, if we're acknowledging that people are only as successful as their support, then that means we also have to take responsibility when people fail. That also means that when people fail, it's not a reflection that they didn't want it bad enough. It's a reflection of maybe their support didn't want it bad enough. Maybe the people in their life didn't want to be there in the ugliness, in the mess long enough to see them rise to their potential. Maybe it's the support. Because if we're acknowledging that on the positive side, that means our communities, that means our organizations, our nonprofits, our for-profit businesses have a lot of ownership when people do not make it. So if success is one thing and failure is another, I can tell you a lot about the ways the system failed me. I'm just going to give you a couple quick spark notes, stats, whatever way you want to categorize it. But I grew up in central Illinois, where I entered foster care at 5 months old. When my mother was pregnant with me, I was in her womb and I was at risk of being placed into a foster care system, as both of my older sisters were already in homes. By the time I was 5 years old, I would move to 5 different placements after being separated from my family. So there was a lot of back and forth in my childhood. where I'd go home and think maybe it's over, and I'd be taken away from them and placed in a new home once again. When I was 6 years old, I was placed into a foster home with my two sisters for the first time, and within days, I started to be physically abused by that foster parent. I would run away from that home twice in my 5.5 years of living in there, or living under their custody. Both would end up in police involvement in investigations, only one of them successfully getting me out of that home. I stayed in over 20 different homes during my time in child welfare. Over 10 plus years of my adolescence in child welfare, and five and a half of those years came in that abusive home. I grew up in 3 different states. I went to 6 different K through 12 schools. I did not have a lot of community, consistency, or stability in my childhood. But still, I'm here. And I'm not doing I'm not here to talk about me. I don't want you to think any more or less about me after this time. I'm here to talk to you about what happens when communities get involved. I'm here to talk to you about what is possible for those that have been faced and come face to face with adversity and trauma and failure time and time again, but people see them where they're at. They experience belonging. My life was directly changed by belonging, despite all of those things I just listed to you. Belonging from teachers, coaches, friends' parents, you name it. People not licensed, people not obligated by their 9 to 5 to help me in my circumstance, people who are just being good people. People who are seeing it as their spot, their role in extending a helping hand to a kid who didn't have a lot of hope that the hand would help. I am here because of belonging. And I know Ori talked about belonging. You're going to hear many people talk about belonging. That is the purpose of why we're here. Why belonging is so important is because you don't have to be an adoptive parent to extend belonging to somebody. You don't have to be somebody that's going to radically change your own life in order to extend belonging to somebody else. Belonging, we like to think, is this fluffy idea. But really, it's very scientific, and it's identified as a fundamental human need. It's something that each and every person in this room needs to be successful in your own lives. It's why when Kristen was trying to get people to just settle down a little bit so we could start the program, when you would see another friendly face that you knew, you would go out and you would say hi. It's the reason why you waited and perfectly timed when you would show up, because you wanted to show up the same time that the people you belonged with would show up. A lot of our decisions on a day-to-day basis are influenced by belonging. We just don't know it. The same thing is true for the children and families navigating the system. They just don't have as much power as we do. They don't have as much control over who's in their life, how long they're in their life. It's a difference of control. Again, despite all of the bad circumstance that I had to deal with as a child, was able to realize some success in my life. So I was fortunate enough to play college football at the great University of Minnesota. Yes, I could have went to it. Thank you. I'm not looking for handouts. I hope that is a genuine Gopher clap. Okay, I love that. I appreciate your maroon suits, sir. That was a tongue twister. Forgive me. I was able to make it to the National Football League as well, where I spent a little time with the Cincinnati Bengals. Oh, who dey? Okay. Or maybe that was just a pro NFL chant. The reason I share that with you is because one of the darkest seasons of my life was not in an abusive home. It was not in the season of my life where I was homeless or I ran away. It was when I was in the National Football League. Because for my entire life, I had been led to believe that if I achieved enough, then one day I would belong. That if I got to a certain level where people would see me in a certain way, that maybe my parents would want to be in my life in the ways that I wanted them to be in my life. That maybe if I got to a certain point where if people hear about what I've achieved, they won't think about what I've gone through, and I'll be welcomed in any space that I go into. But that's not belonging. And so when I came face to face with my life's work, my dream, I realized I couldn't have it. Because I had built it up to be something in my life that it would never be. There is no achievement, there's no degree, there is no job, there is no business that will fill the hole of someone who does not belong. Of someone that doesn't find their people. And the worst thing we can do is tell people that it's going to eventually get better without helping them do the actual work. There's an acronym that I share anywhere I get a chance to. I call it the CARE acronym. It's 4 commitments that anybody can make to meet the belonging needs of people around you. It does not require power, does not require authority, leadership, tenure, money. It just requires a commitment as a person, as a neighbor, as a community member. The C in the CARE acronym stands for compassion. Compassion is really important to me because our society has led us to believe that compassion is synonymous with sympathy, that it's synonymous with empathy even. Compassion is neither of those things. Compassion is active empathy. Sympathy and empathy have to do with what we are feeling about what someone else is dealing with. But it never requires that we get involved. It never requires that we put skin in the game. Compassion are similar feelings that lead you into action. Compassionate people change lives. I want to tell you one story about some compassionate folks in my childhood. I told you I lived in an abusive home from 6 until I was almost 12 years old. In that time, I was fortunate enough to stay in one school building. And this is not an exaggeration. That school building, in more ways than one, saved my life. By far, the most difficult thing that I would have to go through in that home, the most difficult form of abuse was when I would oversleep and miss the bus to go to school. Because I ran the risk of being forced to stay home a day that I didn't anticipate. Because there was never a clear and immediate response to oversleeping and missing the bus to go to school. It was a wide range. Sometimes you would be loved and cared for, which was really confusing. Sometimes you would be awoken to abuse and you wouldn't even know it. So there was one time when I was in 4th grade, I overslept, missed the bus, and I woke up on my own, and instead of accepting abuse, I decided to walk to school. Now, I'm looking at the room a little bit. I think a lot of us know what this was like, but I'm talking about a time that predates smartphones. It was the reign of Nokia and Snake as a game on our phone. You all enjoyed that. Don't act like you didn't. It was a time before Google, Apple Maps existed, so if you needed directions from point A to point B, you needed to go into the computer room and turn on a dial-up modem and go to MapsQuest and print off directions from point A to point B, but also you needed to know the address at which you were going. So as a kid that needed to get to school fast because I knew there was a 12:30 attendance check, and if I didn't beat the attendance check, then I might as well just accept abuse because I'm going to get caught. So I needed to be fast and quick, which is our technology and computers at the time were neither. So I snuck out of the house and I walked the only route to school that I knew, my bus route. I remember when I left the house thinking, it only takes me about 50 minutes to get to school when I get on the bus. I can get there in 3 hours. I'm going to have to book it, but I can get there in 3 hours. So I'm walking to school. Eventually I get there, and I have all these plans in my head. I tell myself, if I wait until a car drives by when I get to school, they'll think I got dropped off. Now, don't judge a 4th grade me. I didn't understand momentum or anything like that, right? I didn't understand that they might think that Gaelin jumped out of a moving vehicle if it just flies by the front door. But I didn't know enough. So I get to the door, I press the buzzer, and there's no response. Okay, that's weird. Press it a second time, no response. Did they not just see the car that went by? Press it a third time, and they unlock the door, but our secretary doesn't address me. She just unlocks the door. I'm like, okay, good morning to you too. I walk in, I'm rushing to try to check in before I go to my class so I can avoid getting in trouble, and I'm rushed by every lead teacher in the building. Every single lead teacher in our entire upper and lower elementary were waiting in the office, and some of them were angry and shaking me and saying, Gaelin, don't you ever do something like that ever again? Some were crying. I was getting kisses on the forehead. It was a lot of emotion in one room for a young kid. But in the midst of the chaos, I see a clock on the back wall, and it was just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It had taken me almost 6 hours to walk to school. I did not beat the attendance check. Law enforcement was called. They had been out looking for me for the last 2.5 hours. If there were smartphones, you would have gotten an Amber Alert of a big-headed kid in a red t-shirt that is missing. I sat in the office that day, got on the bus a couple minutes after, went home to the worst abusive encounter of my entire time in that home. But although I was physically broken down, I wasn't defeated. The reason I wasn't defeated is not because the abuse wasn't bad. It was, like I shared with you, but because of what I learned when I walked into the office that day. I walked into the office that day and experienced immediate compassion by everyone in that building. See, when you experience not belonging, when you experience getting moved and shuffled from home to home, when you experience abuse for as long as I had, it's not even that you question whether people care about you. You believe in your soul that people don't care. You believe at the core of who you are that you go throughout life alone and you will continue to be alone and no one sees you in the midst of what you're going through. Walking into an office full of teachers, some of them I liked, a lot of them I did not, who were actively moved by my absence, changed my life. Who I found my favorite teacher went above her boss's head and called the police because she remembered when I disclosed my abuse to her, and she thought if we didn't do anything that my life would be at stake. Belonging is not just being welcomed into a space. It's that your absence changes that space. It's not just like, hey, yeah, you can come sit at my table or you can come into my home. It's the fact that when you leave my table or you leave my home, it's not the same. Think about the people you love to your core. If they weren't around, your life would not be the same. The people in our community need to experience that very same thing. When I experienced it in that building that day, it changed the way I saw those around me. And it set me up so that I could trust people later in my life. The A in the CARE acronym is authenticity. We can be compassionate, but we also have to be authentic. Authentic is the proven fact that something is legitimate or real. Here's the thing. Yes, you are being invited to get engaged tonight. You do not need to be anything that you are not. The children and families that are going to be on the receiving end of the support from the coalition do not need people to try to become something that they could never sustain. They don't need you to try to get really motivated to get involved now and then never do anything in the future. They just need people to be authentic about what they can and cannot do. Over-promising and under-delivering doesn't do anything but hurt the people on the receiving end of what you're offering. It makes us feel comfortable about what we're doing in the moment, but it hurts people on the receiving end of the work and support that we're offering. There was one person in that elementary school building that was extremely authentic, and her name was Miss Peanut. Miss Peanut was not her government name. That's why we have one chuckle up here. Miss Peanut was called Miss Peanut because she was about 4'5". And Miss Peanut was our elementary school janitor. And she was special. You see, Miss Peanut knew my abuser because we lived in the same neighborhood. And because Miss Peanut was our janitor, she didn't get the same show that everyone else got. She got the real deal. And so Miss Peanut, not over-promising and under-delivering, saw it as her role as a janitor. She was like, I get to build a relationship with those kids every day. And I will. And so my first day in that building, in a new abusive home, Miss Peanut invited me to take a picture with her and a bunch of other kids. And that would be the first invitation to belong of many. Later on, when I would find myself in school suspension, could you believe that I was an ISS kid? I was, and some of you were too. You don't have to admit it. It's okay. I would find myself in school suspension, and Miss Peanut would come into the room and break me out of jail. She would say, Gaelin, you're always in here. You need a new punishment, clearly, because this isn't working. And she would make me do rounds of trash with her. But while she did it, she would let me connect with the people that I wouldn't see if I was in that in-school suspension room. She would let me go and do the rounds in my favorite teacher's classroom so we could connect. She would let me see my friends that I wouldn't see because Miss Peanut, deep down, she knew that I needed connection in that building because she knew I wasn't getting it when I went home. I remember Miss Peanut vividly. There are many things she would do over my 6 years in that one building. There are people who I stayed in their homes, and I don't remember what they looked like. There are people who were my caseworkers for years. I can't remember their name. It does not, or your title, your role, your level of influence over somebody does not determine if they remember what you did for them. It's what you did for them that they remember. The saying goes, people don't remember what you said or how you acted, they remember how you made them feel. And Miss Peanut would change my life by the way she just showed up authentically. The reason I share this part of the CARE acronym with you tonight is because there are people out here in this audience that can be authentic about ways to get engaged after you leave here. For some of you, it might mean, be on the board. Some of you, it might mean volunteering some of your time in a different way. But each and every one of you have to decide what authenticity looks like for you in that moment. I can't make that for you. Ori can't make that decision for you. You don't have to be what you think people need you to be in order to make a difference. You just need to be who you are. Because the people on the receiving end of the coalition's work, they won't benefit from this hypothetical, futuristic version of the coalition. They will benefit from what it presently is right now. They need people to step into their life and support them and see them and extend belonging to them right now. We have to be authentic about ways we can do that. The R in the CARE acronym is resilience. You've heard that a couple times here tonight. I believe entirely too much we use resilience as it pertains to the children and families on the receiving end of the work. But I'm talking about resilience when it applies to communities. You see, resilience is talking about this ability to bounce back, to maintain strength despite tension and stress and pressure that is trying to change you. As you are compassionate and authentic and you try to engage, there are things that are going to stretch you. There are things that are going to annoy you or make you feel like maybe I shouldn't stay as engaged as I currently am. There are going to be a lot of excuses that come to mind about not being involved anymore. My question to you is, are you going to be resilient? Just because you extend a helping hand doesn't mean the person on the receiving end of it has to accept it. Sometimes we think because we are compassionate and authentic people that people owe us their trust and respect. And here's what I'm here to tell you. If no one else will, I will tell you. The children and families on the receiving end of the work of the coalition owe you nothing. They owe you nothing. Because all they've been doing is dealing with the stuff that life has thrown their way. They have been surviving. They don't owe you trust or respect. Because there are times where they did trust and they did respect and people let them down because they weren't resilient enough. When I was 12 years old, I got back with my biological father after a 7-year custody battle with the state. I got reunified with my dad. We immediately fell into poverty. 7th grade, we were homeless and had no electricity and gas. My 8th grade year, I spent half the year living out of my dad's Explorer. My freshman year of high school, we lived, and this is in western Wisconsin now. We lived above a dance studio. We lived in the back of a bar, which I know some of you know that bars in Wisconsin have apartments in them. It blew my mind too. It was mirrors wall to wall. I lived in a fun house. We shared a bedroom out of a stranger's house down the street. My sophomore year of high school was the first time since I got back with my father that we found some stability, that we kind of got on our feet. And then halfway through my sophomore year of high school, my biological father got arrested. And as an honor roll student, as a 2-year varsity starter on football and basketball teams, as someone who had my entire future ahead of me, I made the decision to drop out of high school. Because I was so done trusting that people would do right by me. I was so done believing and hoping and sitting on my hands, waiting for the day for someone to change what I was going through. I wanted to take matters into my own hands. Would me dropping out of high school have led me to my success? Probably not. But you know what? I will take failure every day of the week. At that point in my life, I would take failure every day of the week if it meant I failed because I failed, not because my support did. So I left that office that day when the school told me that my dad had been arrested after he hadn't come home for 4 days. And I was on my way out of the school building before I broke down with emotion in the hallway. And my high school football coach, who was our gym teacher, our health teacher, and our driver's ed teacher, followed me out of that office, man of many hats, followed me out of that office, and he said, Gaelin, I can't imagine what you're thinking or going through right now. He said, I don't have all the answers, but I want you to come live with me and my family until we figure it out. Still to this day, by far the most selfless invitation I've ever received in my life. I looked my coach in his eyes, moved by the invitation. I said, thank you, but no thank you. Not as a reflection of him, but as a reflection of everyone prior to him who has let me down. Who am I to believe that he'll be any different? And that same thing goes for the children and families on the receiving end of the coalition's work. Who are they to believe that this will be different? I didn't owe my coach trust in that moment. I just had to survive. And so I continued to walk out of the school before two of the high school counselors stopped me. And their names were Jenna and Sarah. They were two short white women. And they were standing in between me and my freedom. Now, I was 6'4", 215 pounds as a 16-year-old. And this may or may not have been a time of life where The Blind Side was very popular. And I looked at them dead in their eyes and I said, Sarah, Jenna, this is not The Blind Side. You are not Leanne Toohey. Get out my way, or I will move you. I'm not Big Mike. I will move you. But they didn't move. They stood 10 toes down and they were just like, you know what, Gaelin, we're not going to let you do this. And so I go to their office and I sit there in silence for the rest of the day. When the school bell rings, I try to sneak out of school as best as I could as a 6'4" black kid in our western Wisconsin rural town. And my high school football coach was parked out front with the driver's ed car. Passenger door open. He said, Gaelin, get in, let's go. I thought about making a run for it. But I respected the fact that he followed through even though I told him not to. My coach would start to change my life because he was one of the most resilient supporters I've ever had the privilege of knowing. He was not going to accept my no's for an answer. He was not going to allow me to blow things up just as it was getting good. He was not going to allow me to spiral and fall victim to circumstance. He saw what was possible, and he was committed for the long run. Are we going to be resilient in this room? Are you going to be committed to what is possible? Because I didn't accept my coach's invitation the first time he offered it. I didn't accept it the second time just because I moved into his house. It would take months, almost years, for me to accept my coach's invitation. My coach was resilient, and that's one of the only reasons I'm here in front of you today. The E in the CARE acronym is empowerment. Empowerment is the bow that ties all these things together, because we can be compassionate, we can be authentic, we can be resilient, but if we're not empowering children and families to take control of their own future, then we're just buying time. If we're not setting them up so that they can be successful when we can no longer support them, we're just buying time. Empowerment has nothing to do with me and everything to do with my coach and my dad's relationship. As I was living in my high school coach's home, like I told you, he was a man of many hats. He would give me driver's ed lessons on the way to the county jail to visit my father. And instead of dropping me off at the door so I could go talk to my dad alone, he would come in with me. And he would sit there, and I would very quickly learn that my dad and him had a relationship that I did not know about. Here's what I learned. The day we moved into the district before my freshman year of high school, my coach gave my dad an open invitation to come have lunch with him whenever he wanted. And for the last 18 months of my life, my dad would take him up on that invitation many times. They had a relationship. They were building a friendship. They were building a bond that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. So on the day that my coach learned that my dad was arrested, my coach called my dad in the county jail. Before he saw me in the hallway, he called my dad in the county jail. And before he could get a word out, my dad cut him off. And he said, "Coach, I hoped you would call. Tell me what I need to do so you can take my son." My dad, who went to the state Supreme Court for 7 years to get custody of me again, voluntarily gave over guardianship to my high school coach who had known him for 18 months. Not because he was trained, not because he was this professional that had been doing his whole life, dedicated his whole life to this, but because he empowered my dad. Belonging is a safety net that catches people when they go through hard things. It's things that we can fall on when life knocks us off our feet. If we start to build the safety net, the tapestry of belonging, if we start to build it the day that people need us, we're too late. My dad was empowered by my coach long before we ever needed his help. And that's what allowed my dad to trust him when we needed it most. My dad would get out of jail 2 days before the state championship my junior year of high school. Yes, that's a humble brag. State champs. He would get out of jail 2 days, and I would be packed up, ready to go. And my dad said, "Sorry, son, we're not going anywhere." He said, "I need you to stay with your coach. I've seen too much growth in you over the last 6 months. I'm not getting in the way of you and your future." And so my dad, for what was one of the most exciting times in my life, voluntarily stood on the sideline because it was what was best for me. One of the most selfless decisions anyone has ever made. And my dad did it, not because he magically matured and overcame all the trauma in his own life, but because someone supported him. My coach empowered my dad, and my dad empowered me. I know we've heard the term, hurt people. But take this home with you. Empowered people empower people. My coach empowered my father, and my father empowered me and pushed me toward success, pushed me toward my future, so that I wouldn't fall victim to the circumstance that was waiting around the corner. I would go to the University of Minnesota, not because it was the best football decision for me, not because it was going to give me the best NFL prospects, but because it was 35 minutes from where I went to high school. Because it was close to where I belonged. Belonging changes lives. And every single person in this room has something to say about the tapestry of belonging in your community. I'm going to leave you with one quote. There's a quote from a doctor, his name is Peter Levine, that I adore. He says, "Trauma isn't what happens to you. Trauma is what happens in the absence of an empathetic witness." I don't care what brought you here tonight. Each and every one of you have a chance, have a calling, have an invitation to be an empathetic witness. Thank you for your time.